Welcome to the inaugural episode of Tresor Expansions. I'm Chloe Lula, the host of this show and a Tresor Club resident. With these interviews, we want to shed light on the artists closely affiliated with Tresor. Longtime legends who have released on the label across the decades, past and present regulars in the booth, and up-and-comers who are just getting their foot in the door of the club. Each conversation dissects the subject's musical influences and the songs that shaped them, as well as their connection to the sound and ethos of the Berlin institution. Today's episode is with the late Juan Mendez, otherwise known as Silent Servant, who tragically passed away in January around the time when the show was originally set to air. He was 46 years old. We got together to record this conversation a few weeks before the new year when he came to Berlin to play his curated night at Tresor. He invited a few friends to the lineup, myself included. It's surreal to listen back to these words, thinking that they were the last we'd exchange. Juan was a longtime musical hero whose friendship over the last few years surprised and touched me. And I feel incredibly privileged, as anyone who knew him does, to have been part of his orbit. I'm not sure that I'd be the artist I am today without his influence, which is a sentiment many people share. The world suffers an incredible loss. Juan was a visionary, multidisciplinary artist whose work across graphic design, DJing, and production helped define the contemporary techno canon, as well as its visual representation on underground label art and party flyers around the world. Born in Guatemala and raised in LA, he came to define the city's underground sound, distilling his early love for new wave, with the subgenres bubbling up from downtown LA warehouse parties and early Berlin techno. The musical language he pioneered, scuzzy dance music that found the emotional resonance between techno and post-punk, became uniquely his own. He went on to produce the shoegaze band Tropic of Cancer, whose stylish and seductive atmospherics became a hallmark that would permeate the Silent Servant project shortly thereafter. He was also part of Sandoval District with Regis, Female, and Function, a group that became the lingua franca for an entire generation of contemporary techno artists. In this sense, he brought together many different facets of the creative worlds he touched, a kind of musical glue between genres and scenes. Not just a musician, Juan was a visual artist by day and created striking identities for the covers of his now defunct Jealous God label and the Sandoval District project. Many of these pulled from his vast archive of influences. References from film, literature, out-of-print single-run zines, experimental photography, and beyond. We covered all of this in our conversation. The music and art that resonated with him and shaped him into the artist he would become. We also spoke at length about his recent EP for Tresor, In Memoriam. The 4 tracks are an elegy to his memories and influences, synthesizing the sounds of dub techno, new wave, and electro from Detroit. Juan was a true conduit between creative realms and the pulse that ran through underground scenes in his native LA, Berlin, New York, and beyond. At the end of this episode are some of the Silent Servant tracks that made me fall in love with his music and, to me, really define the essence of his style. Thank you so much for listening. Here is Juan Mendez. Thank you so much for joining me.
No problem.
Juan. I asked you to kick off this conversation with a song from the Tresor back catalog that's been inspirational for you. And you chose a few: Solid Sleep by Jeff Mills, which came out in 1994, Home by Robert Hood, which also came out in 1994, and Flash Flood by Infinity, which is a moniker of Juan Atkins, from 1996. So can you talk more about these and where you were in your musical development when they came out?
So Luckily, we did have a few good record stores that I could buy stuff from in LA at the time. There was one called, oh my God, I'm totally spacing. There was like Street Sounds, and then the one where Doc Martin used to work. But they were all in Melrose. They were pretty amazing. My friend Gabriel worked at one of them, actually. Like the way I learned about like Detroit techno was through a friend of mine, this guy Marcus Miller. He basically introduced me to these RNS compilations called In Order to Dance. I think it's In Order to Dance 5 specifically, because that had like Kenny Larkin, Carl Craig 6ix9ine, Basic Channel. Phyllis Track 2 is actually on that one. And then just through friendship, started just being more interested in Detroit techno. And then, that connection of Detroit Berlin at that time is what was happening, so there was a really big export of like Detroit artists going to Berlin. It's funny because at that time there was like a little bit wider distribution with some of like labels like Tresor. Like you could go to like Tower Records, find a CD comp, One of these early Tresor compilations, it had like Dan Bell and Jeff Mills and a few other things on it. I kind of forget. It was kind of like this like burgundy and black. That's all I remember the cover. But the first time I heard that track, like Jeff Mills' Solid Sleep, I was just like kind of blown away because it had this like, it's like the sad chords, like it wasn't like a dub techno track, but super chordy, but like, again, like this like endless loop that's very like emotive, but very dark, but also emotive. That's just the sound that to this day, like it just stuck in my brain. Friend Marcus introduced me to this guy, Joe Babylon, and Alan Avanase, who used to run a label. Well, Alan still does. It's called Plug Research. And Alan and Joe were helping out like Carl Craig distribute records in LA. I remember I went to one of their parties and Joe was DJing. They gave me a copy of a couple of Planet E 12 inches. I was like watching Joe DJ and like he had this cool like clear record box. It was like kind of the old school ones, but it was like clear on the sides and the front. And his records were just like immaculate in like plastic sleeves, but I'm like, what is all this stuff that you're playing? Like, I've never heard most of this stuff. And a lot of it was like just a bunch of Detroit stuff that I'd never heard of. Just because, like Detroit techno was not big in LA, it just was more of an export, at least for something in LA just was less common. So he just started pulling the records out, showing me stuff. And then he's like, hey, so do you have a fax machine at home? I'm like, yeah, totally, I do. Yeah, era of fax machines. He said, call this number, tell them to fax you their list. And it was the list to submerge. So like, it was awesome because like, at the time I was working as a janitor. I've worked as a janitor for a long time, which is pretty funny. I was like basically senior in high school. And I was just like, what is this? Like, I love this. And like, I'd get the fax list and I just started like ordering stuff. So that's how I got all my first Trexia records. Wow. First like Basic Channel records. They had like all of the Mauricio records at the time. And also like, I saw the advent of like right when Chain Reaction started. So all that stuff kind of like, I just was like ordering it, finding about Model 500, like through like Transmat and stuff and like Model 500 Info World and, finding about Cybertron, getting more into like Tresor stuff. Because there's like, once you kind of made that connection, you're like, oh, these things totally work together. And like, you start seeing what it is, So this Infinity track, it was like kind of like this thing. I was like, what is this? This is amazing. And it took me forever to find. The thing about it that I still love is like, it's kind of got this weird, like, like Juan Atkins style, like, kind of like funkiness that's like this, the way the sequences are and the bass lines still kind of hits. There's like these strings that are on the track that are super like, that part is also what I love about New Wave. Like you have all these like rhythms with these like emotive strings that kind of change the tone of things. basically that all that information has just stuck with me. Like it's just one of the things that like is made me who I am, and it continues to influence what I do. For looking at that list, like, Infinity Flash Flood is like the emotive thing. That's what I love about it. Like with the Mills track, that was like special. It's just a really special track for me because it was the first time I'd heard stuff like that in that way. And then with Rob Hood, with that track Home Again, it's like this very like emotive, really long ambient intro thing. Pretty amazing. But again, it's like aspects of minimalism. It's like mixing like ambient music with like techno and making something awesome. But Rob Hood was really good at that with that kind of stuff.
That track before, but it has this cool like machine music type percussion as well, which I wasn't expecting from him.
Totally, yeah. Again, even that era, like finding like Rob Hood Minimal Nation. It's funny, I sold my copies because I got another one. I bought a repress. But so my first copy of Minimal Nation was like, it was a mispress. There's one track on there that isn't on other versions apparently. So someone told me that the person that bought it, getting that stuff real time, like, I was like stoked. But then it's like being in like a room alone, like you're stoked, but you can't tell anyone because you're like, does anyone realize how awesome this is? And it's like, oh wait, there's no one else here. So it took a while to find connections, and luckily, that did happen over time. But
yeah, so was there much of a scene for this in LA?
No. Like we would try like a little bit, like it just never really worked. I was explaining to someone the other day that, me and my brother brought out Rolando to LA like right before Knights of the Jaguar came out, and like it was an awesome party, but like there's like really not that many people there, and like, but that's how that it was at the time. And it was like, this is like the late 90s. Yeah, so like by then, like I started like producing and stuff a little bit with some friends, and I learned a lot at that time. So
well, I think this ties in well with your new release, which is called In Memoriam. It's coming out at the end of November. The press release for the EP describes it as a quote-unquote deeply personal memoir of a career spent exploring and absorbing the shadowy side of music, a carefully crafted elegy to people, places, and times past, and the lasting effect they have on the present. What are some of the experiences you were trying to encapsulate in the music?
I mean, mainly it's just like periods of time. So like the first track, like, and I did it by years. It's something me and my wife Simone kind of like, we kind of thought of it one night. We were just like up, like talking. And this is before the record had been finished. I had like 2 tracks kind of done, and then I had to do 2 more. But I was like, oh, if we call it In Memoriam, I specify a year for like an influence, right? So it was just easier to break down. And it was kind of the first time I've been able to do this like on a record, because I got into like wave and like kind of EBM stuff and industrial stuff a little bit later in my life. Because like first it was like, I was really into like shoegaze stuff, and I still am obviously. But then like when I found about techno, like it changed a lot of things. And that was like the main focus for a long time. And then after that, like basically it like kind of had run its course a little bit, but like the reissue stuff had started happening. I was like DJing at bars in LA, and that's how like to a few other friends, like the same friend Marcus, he moved to New York, and he took me to a bar once, and there was like in this crazy basement, and these ladies would like be playing like all this post-punk stuff, and that was the first time I heard like Grauzone, Ice Bear, things like that, and I was like, what is this? Like, but as a young kid, like early on, like I was really into new wave. Like I was a really big New Order fan, really big Smiths fan. I'll stress that. But that's kind of like, then that broke into like shoegaze stuff and like some of Britpop stuff, but not so much. But then I really found out like Aphex Twin, and then that kind of blossomed into like trying to research techno and getting into DJing. And like, mind you, this is I was like 14 when I started DJing. With the record, basically, it kind of cuts back. Like, it was the first time to be able to like distill all these influences into like 4 different tracks. So like, M87 is kind of like, for me, was like more based on like Cybertron kind of era. Like influenced by that kind of style. So M90 was more like, for reference, like, I mean, at the time I wasn't listening to stuff, but it's more like this like EBM kind of wave kind of style. It's a little more like straightforward and like a little more like dystopian vocals and stuff like that. Still with like strings. That's the thing. Most of the tracks have like a lot of stringy chordy elements.
Yeah, I can hear the influences from the Tresor tracks you sent.
Yeah, they're there very obviously, but I'm trying to make it sound as much as it could as myself, you know, to try to mix those things. So the 99 one, I think it's more of like the dub techno, like full on. Like tried to do this before, and this is the first time I think I feel pretty good about how it came out. And then the last one's more based on like kind of like the Birmingham techno stuff, like sequencer techno, and that's a whole nother part that like why someone like Carl Connor for me was like super important. We became friends like a really long time ago. They used to have a distribution company that they were working with us at the time. So many crazy memories of like going to Birmingham and meeting Carl and Tony Vieira and Peter Sutton. You know, I was a really big Surgeon and Regis fan before I met them.
Same.
Yeah. It's funny because I have a really funny dream that I still remember as a kid that like, I told Carl this and he always laughs at me. I had some dream that like, I had Surgeon, Regis, and female, and they were playing at my high school gym, at an event, and this is funny because like I know all of them, and you know, and with Carl, I've become like really, you know, he's like one of my best friends, like life wise. It's just funny, like how things happen. But you know, Surgeon for me, like I was just like a huge fan, and that's the thing. Like this Atoll 12-inch was in the States. It took me a while to find. It was on this X mix that DJ Hell had done. It's like one of my favorite mixes of all time because there's like Richard Bart's, Sound Vandals, Surgeons on it. There's just like really cool track selection of stuff. Like again, even Surgeon, like that Atoll track's very like, it's like a chordy, but it's very metallic, you know, and it's it's like a weird like techno dub freak out of just metal minimalism, you know. And then, for example, with Carl, like, you know, Delivered into the Hands of Indifference, it's like this atmosphere that he always manages to be able to do. It's this life force within the tracks, even though they're very repetitive. They're just like super, like, just amazing. That last part, you know, is like very important, like techno-wise, you know, for me. That's how the record kind of came together.
The last one, is the one I've been playing out a lot
cool.
recently.
Nice.
Actually.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Rad,
I really
rad.
like it. But yeah, I mean, your approach to writing the EP almost seems like an extension of your work as a curator and as a label head in terms of just taking different cultural references and recontextualizing them within your creative vision.
I guess just over time, it's the only way that I guess I keep myself interested because I guess I can get kind of like, not bored with music stuff, but like I like it when it's kind of has some elements of diversity, but also consistency in different ways, you know. It was really fun to finally do that. You know, it took me a long time to be able to do it, but it felt really good when it was done.
Would you say that nostalgia plays a big role in your work? I mean, I guess I'm thinking specifically about like your use of atmospheres and strings and also just like literally referencing the past, this kind of sentimental, like reflective sensibility.
I guess with the music and even when I'm DJing, it's about like trying to instill some element of feeling within things, but at the same time keeping momentum, like having people have a sense of a feeling, but also a sense of pause, or you can have a point of reflection. It's, I guess for me, it's always kind of the point of trying to do that and trying to execute those marks, and it's, especially techno music's really interesting because it's like timing rhythms and all this stuff that's like there's a lot of tension and things. And so it's like that whole tension and sense of like release, but also like restraint, and I think that techno music is this element, this thing that the restraint creates tension, and then I like also smothering it with like emotion. That's what, for me, what strings do, and that's what like a lot of Detroit stuff and kind of has that feeling. It kind of engulfs things, and I think that's like kind of what I really love.
Your wife played strings on your...
Oh, yeah, she did on AIM-87. So Simone like actually played strings on it.
What does she play?
So she has played piano. She took piano lessons. Like, it's just funny. Like, she's just really good at just doing things sometimes. She's way better at chord progressions than I am, because I always have a tendency of playing the same types of chords like over and over again. But she was able to like make it more musical and even more emotive. I'm like, oh, this is awesome. Just do it. Like, I'll just let you do it. So it was really cool. That was really fun. Like cool. When that happened. So yeah, that was pretty special.
Nice. Well, I guess then moving on to another song, or a set of songs, Nag, Nag, Nag and Messages Received by Cabaret Voltaire, which both came out in 1980. When did you first hear these, and why do you want to talk about them?
It's one of those things, like, that was a really big reboot to hear that. Because, like, it's funny, like in the year 2000, it's like the music industry had kind of taken a nosedive. Basically, techno, it was like kind of dying. And then minimal kind of was taking over. But it also was a crux, like, where like in New York, there was like DFA was happening, and there was all this like kind of different stuff, Again, like when I went to that trip to New York to hear like post-punk and what this was, like I was not old enough to experience any of that real time. And by the time I was old enough, like Cabaret Voltaire was already like on its like last legs, if not almost done. But it was like the first time I heard Nag, 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 I was like, dude, like, what is this? It's like this like sick drum machines. And then like it's guitars that sound like synths, which like it's just guitars, I guess, on that one. It just kind of blew me away because it was like the momentum, but also the minimalism, but also the liveliness of like, it's like punk music without being punk music, you know what I mean? I mean, Nag, Nag, Nag was kind of, I heard Suicide Ghost Riders as well around the same time, so they kind of have the same feeling, and it's really, to me, it's really special. That's the thing with like the connection, like with Carl, like he's the first person that showed me DAF. Like I hadn't heard DAF before. He sent me some like mixed CD in the mail like years and years ago. And it had DAF on there. And when I heard DAF, I understood Regis more. I was like, okay, this is totally, like I totally get it now. And the importance of all that stuff. And, you know, messages received, it's like kind of, so when you start going backwards, it's just like, I really like just simple drum machines and like just weird droney stuff, and like that is atmospheric and emotive in its own weird ways, and kind of dystopic. You know, I have a tendency of really liking stuff like that. So,
me too. I mean, I am like a diehard Sandwell District fan.
Totally. Yeah.
And when I've tried to kind of deconstruct the music, it is so simple in a lot of ways. But it's the use of atmosphere and like a simple percussion and
and that's the thing. And I'll leave it to Carl. You know, Carl and Dave are both really good at that. I'm okay at it. I think they're better at it than I am, but I've learned a lot from Carl in different ways, and he, you know, influenced me a lot. Even when you look at like periods of music in different times, like Phil Spector, like if you listen to the backbeats of those records, it's just like super, it's like, you know, just like super bass snare, but like through like reverbs, and it just sounds super huge. And then just like with the simple, really good vocal, you know, and then some music in the background. Like that idea of the simplicity of those things, it's kind of like in a weird way its own loop, you know, like the way those backbeats were, you know, these quick in and out 3-minute songs. And you can look at that, or let's say like the Velvet Underground, you know, it's like the simplicity, but also weird complexity that happens in their music just by like adding like weird, you know, like drones from different crazy instruments that like John Cale, like on some crazy, like, you know, he collected really strange instruments and just like drone machines and stuff, because he kind of came from like the Terry Riley school of like music, and just like lots of drone stuff. So if you go like, okay, 50s music, you know, Lou Reed was like really into like the whole pop 50s thing, but like distilled with his writing, and you bring in like John Cale, and it's like this culture clash. And then you have like, you know, Mo Tucker on the drums, and it's simple backbeat, crazy drone, and then 50s guitar. That's really simple. And those things to this day still, like maybe at the time were not that popular, but they've become iconic because of how simple but inventive those things were. Kind of to your point of talking about like, let's say Sandwell District, like it's the same sentiment, you know. It's like using those ideas, still like keeping that kind of like giving yourself parameters of how you work and exploring new ideas, but within those things. And you know, Sandwell District was really interesting, you know, so like, you know, we just had the box set reissue happen, which we were really happy with. We have a second compendium of like, we did like a selection of the tracks off of the different 12 inches. The next one's called, it's just based on the blog, it's just Where Next. It was a Sandwell District compilation. But again, it's like putting all that stuff in and like kind of looking at everything and the simplicity of things and the importance of things of how it all came together. And it's interesting to look back at it again, you know, and still find relevance in it, so which is pretty cool.
At what point did you start fusing these two different streams of musical influence together? So you're really into like new wave post-punk, and then you get really into like the dub techno sound coming from Berlin, and you're working as a janitor for a while. So what happened?
Well, it's funny because so like there's pockets where like I got really into some things, and like, you know, and then when I started really getting into like more techno, I still would, I mean, my brother would go to like concerts and stuff, but techno became more like the forefront. And then I found out about post-punk around that time and started getting more into that stuff. And then that kind of took over, and it kind of like techno took a little bit of a backseat. But and then at that time, that's when Carl was like, hey, if you ever want to make techno again, because this is like 2000s, it was really bad. Like literally like, you know, it seemed like techno was not going to come back. So, but then at the time, that's when like Oscut was like still happening. And like, as we started doing Sandwell District, that's when like the Sandwell District nights started happening. So I think my first Sandwell District, I think, is in 2004, possibly.
Okay.
But by 2008, I think that was it. I think my first time I played Barricade was like 2009 or 10. It took a while for things to kind of merge, but like it was the time when like things really could get in my brain or mixed up more. And like, you know, we would do these like Where Next like mixes and they would have like all kinds of weird post-punk and stuff and we'd post them on the blog and blah, blah, blah. So it was pretty funny. But even then it was still like, at least in my brain, I was trying to fuse the ideas. But honestly, it's been like the past like 10 years when it's happened more. You know, I think it's been 13 years maybe since my first album, Negative Fascination, on Hospital with Dom. So those are all kind of like fusions of like techno, EBM, wave. But this 12-inch is almost even more because it's like I kind of could bring in like the whole like more like Detroit techno thing that I used to always try to emulate but really couldn't pull off until now. It's like I feel a little more confident in the studio to do. It just takes me a while. I've tried to do it. I just feel like this 12-inch on Tresor was like the first time I was really able to like to pull it off.
So your work as Silent Servant is so distinctive to me because it's also so visual.
Yeah.
You've also held a job as a graphic designer and as an artistic director. So how do you feel that your visual art practice complements and informs your music making process?
It kind of helps a lot. I mean, I used to try to like work it where like there would be like one base image that would help, you know, guide things. Now it's a bit of both. It depends, you know. Sometimes they kind of come together at the same time. Simone's been helping me a lot with visual stuff because I felt that I'd kind of hit a bit of a wall. Yeah, I think when you do a lot of stuff, it's like you have to kind of keep inventing, and sometimes it takes someone, you know, kind of shaking up your brain by doing something that you wouldn't normally do, and then you're like, wow, that's actually such a better way to do it. So there's been a lot of that. But the work, you know, creatively, it informs it when it needs to, you know. It doesn't always work, but it's like, you know, finding a narrative for both things is important. So it does inform a lot.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think the Jealous God label that you were running for a while was like a very nice synthesis of your music and your artistic reference points.
Yeah. It was fun. I mean, it was like, that was just really, we were really trying to get away from like the black and white Sandwell District stuff because we felt like we'd like beat it to death kind of. But, you know, coming back to it, I realized like how important it was even for me to like go back to that and like rediscover that part because I realized that like it's kind of like where my strength lies in that. But yeah, with Jealous God, it was interesting, and that's helped with a lot of other things, creating different narratives and bringing color into things and stuff like that, which was like really difficult. But once it happened, it was cool.
In terms of, you know, what you have going on right now, you do still balance a career with your music.
Yeah.
How do you feel that you've been able to?
It's sometimes not that hard. It just depends, you know. It's like I like working, so it's like I like structure. So the jobs definitely help with that. You know, gigs are great. You know, Triangle has been awesome. You know, they do a great job of like helping balance just by, you know, making sure everything's like organized. But for me, it's just been helpful just because it allows some sense of freedom in different ways. I think there's an awesome thing about when you commit to music completely and that becomes your life, and that's like, but that takes a certain type of personality that sometimes I guess like I prefer to like do it as I need to versus like stressing out about it, you know? So that's what I think I like the balance of it, and we'll see how much longer I can do it, but so far so good.
What is and we talked about this a little bit before the interview, but what is your current creative practice like when you decide that you want to work on music?
You know what? It's like I'll do it in pockets. I try to like give myself a sense of reference, and then just kind of referencing things, being like, okay, I want it to sound like this, and then I'll like start a sequence, and then just like figure it out from there. I mean, this is maybe to my detriment sometimes, but I try not to labor too much over like jamming. Like I try to give it a sense of focus so I can have a beginning and an end, and like get through the project as I need to. Just because for me, like if I keep sessioning, like it stresses me out, because like I'm like, I don't know what's good at some point if I've done too many sessions. And then you kind of get lost in it, and then it's like, like this is going to take me more time to edit than to actually just do it one time, So I do like that sense of like kind of going and doing it. That's what Carl has taught me a lot too. Is like, a lot of bands, like, some records get recorded in a week, 2 weeks, like the actual sessions. And then the mixing is a whole other thing. But the actual writing part, they might have done some demos, but the writing is like, you go in and do it for a couple weeks, and then you're done, So that part is I try to maintain that element in my brain, because it's the only way that I can kind of like work it out.
You consume a lot of like films, books. I mean, what's inspiring you right now? What's like your current diet in terms of what
I mean, I'm like a really bad reader. My wife is amazing at reading, so she'll actually will read to me sometimes. It's awesome. I mean, it's usually visual stuff, like I'm like the quick, like if I see something, I'm like, okay, that's rad. It's always like the same not recycled things, but like I'll come back to things, so we have a really great streaming service called Shudder in LA.
Oh yeah, isn't that like the horror?
It's like it's all horror movies, but the crazy thing is, so they have really awesome like weird 80s stuff that's like just like awesome and weird. And Simone knows a lot about film as well. We both watch a lot of movies together, so like she always finds really cool stuff. Anything like weird 80s stuff. Like there was one movie called I think it was El Día de la Bestia. It's like the Day of the Beast. It's like the Spanish film in Madrid, and it's like about some crazy priest like trying to like not let the devil get re-risen, and like he teams up with some like rocker guy he meets at like a heavy metal shop, and like it's just like this crazy movie. It's like super rad, and just stuff like that. It's like, again, it's nostalgic, because it like just again, the list is like so wide, like anything from like Miss 45 to like,
I love that movie,
like to like Cronenberg stuff. We've been watching a lot of like Cronenberg's son.
Oh yeah, I haven't seen any of his stuff actually.
It's awesome.
Oh really?
Like
okay.
It's actually really good. Yeah, so we just kind of like go through it. It's like a really long list of like stuff. I mean, I still revisit the same kind of stuff, but like people like Julian House, and like as a graphic designer, I've always really respected. And he's done covers from like Primal Scream to like Broadcast. And, just like me and this guy in Spain were talking, like whoever the graphic designer for like Danceteria in New York in the 80s, like awesome. So like there's like this graphic archive that he runs, but Danceteria, there's like a website that had all their old flyers. It's like, and it's like all of it's like black and white and just like sick, but it's like, you look at things from like how like Fiorucci used to do so much graphic design, and like if you look at their books, it's like a fashion brand. I don't love all of it, but like some of the graphic design stuff was just super sick. So just, it's just like finding stuff just like from an archival standpoint. Like, I really love like weird cults that didn't work. But like the Process Church of Final Judgment is like, you look at their like pamphlets and they're like sick, and like, and that stuff just stays with you. At least for me, it has. It's really funny. But it's like that whole like element of like just dystopic propaganda that happens in the world that like, it's like a pool of inspiration.
Yeah. No, I mean, one of the reasons why I love what you do as a producer and as a curator is you have a really interesting way of juxtaposing like archival material with contemporary stuff and like making it work. Like I listen to your NTS show all the time, and it's definitely like a good representation.
I mean, that's the thing. I think at the end of the day, for me, that's why like the idea of optimistic decay is like for me, it's like the way I live my life, kind of just constantly finding stuff. Things will end and things will restart, and just keeping that cycle going, So yeah, thanks.
There's one episode, it came out a long time ago, but I remember that the artwork is black and white, and there are a couple tracks from Siglo XX in it. But that is the mix I listen to before I play any DJ set. I put it on while I get ready.
Thank you. Yeah, Siglo XX is mental. I love that band.
So what are you working on right now, and what's next on the horizon for you?
It's kind of just getting through this tour. I'm kind of getting back to LA. I mean, it's been like a really long tour, so kind of just figuring things out, like what next moves are. I haven't worked on music in a while, so I do have to finish the second Tresor 12-inch. And yeah, just like we have, there's some San District stuff coming up as well that we have to kind of get through, which we can talk about later. But yeah, so it's just keeping up with everything that's happening, you know. It's like there's been a lot of work to do with a lot of different things. So it's just like kind of maintaining what's happening and then finding like what's next and where next.
Cool. I mean, have you ever thought about relocating over here just because so much of your music life is over here?
It depends, you know. It's still like, I've done it part-time before. Could happen again, but it's still TBD, you know. But right now it feels good to go. I want to go back home, eat a taco, and chill out. So, but it's been a good tour, and it's been awesome.
Okay, cool. Well, thanks so much for talking to me.
Thank you. I appreciate it very much.
The following tracks are among my favorites of Juan's, showing different facets of his musical personality. Lust Abandon from his third release on Jealous God in 2013, Moral Divide from his 2012 album Negative Fascination, and Recurrent Sleepwalk, a single from the VA released on Under My Feet last year. you for listening to the first episode of Tresor Expansions. In this episode, you also heard Flash Flood by Infinity and Juan Atkins, Home by Robert Hood, Atoll by Surgeon, Messages Received by Cabaret Voltaire, Speed and Sound by Sandwell District, M87 by Silent Servant, and Autumn by Siglo XX. We'll be back again in 2 months. See you next time.